There is a devastating moment that every single one of us has experienced, but hardly anyone dares to put into words. It is that piercing instant when you realize that your best friend no longer knows you. Not because of betrayal, not because of a fight, not because something unforgivable happened. No, it is far more subtle and at the same time, far more brutal. You look into their eyes and realize you no longer recognize the person standing before you. And the cruelest part? They don't recognize you either. That strange ache you felt in your chest as these words sank in is proof that you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is the silent grief of understanding that the people who once defined your world eventually become strangers. And today, you are about to discover why the deepest friendships of your life were already destined to fade from the very first day. But here's the twist. This isn't a tragedy. It's evolution in its purest form. What I'm about to share with you challenges everything you've ever been taught about loyalty, connection, and human bonds. It intertwines the raw truths uncovered by evolutionary psychology with the profound insights Carl Jung gave us about how the human mind actually works. And once you hear this, you will never again feel guilt for the friendships that slipped away, because you will finally see that it was not your fault. It was not their fault. It was nature doing exactly what it was programmed to do. Let's begin with a truth so hard that no one ever tells you. The friendships you swore would last forever in your teenage years were designed to die. Not by accident, not because of neglect, but because that is precisely how the system was meant to work. Research shows that after the age of 30, we keep consistent contact with less than 20% of our high school friends. And here's the devastating part. It isn't coincidence, and it isn't carelessness. It's biology. Your brain is literally wired to abandon those friendships once they no longer serve your survival. Think back to your best friend when you were 15, the one you swore you would never lose, the one who knew your secrets better than anyone, the one with whom you made impossible plans for the future. That friendship felt like the most real thing in your entire world, sometimes even more real than your own family. But here comes the painful revelation. It was never truly about the two of you as individuals. It was about your brains using each other as tools to complete a stage of evolutionary development. And when that stage ended, your brains discarded the bond. That wasn't the collapse of a friendship. It was the success of a biological process as old as humanity itself. Carl Jung understood this silent machinery of the psyche, and modern science continues to confirm it in surprising ways. To grasp why this feels so cruel, you need to understand something unsettling about adolescent friendships. From a biological standpoint, those intense bonds were never designed to bring you happiness. They were designed to ensure the survival of your species. Picture yourself not as a modern teenager, but as a 15-year-old in the prehistoric world. Your survival depended on a single, brutal necessity. You had to separate from your family to avoid inbreeding and build alliances with other young people to explore dangerous territories. That's what those fiery, obsessive teenage friendships were created to achieve. They were an evolutionary mechanism, forcing you to step away from the safety of home, even when it meant risking your life. That is why teenage friendships feel so extreme. They are obsessive, they are exclusive, they are dramatic, irrational, and full of blind loyalty. Why? Because they needed to be powerful enough to pull you out of the comfort of your family and push you into the unknown alongside another teenager. That intensity you remember with nostalgia wasn't pure love. It was chemical manipulation. Your brain was flooding you with emotions designed to override rational thought, so that you would take risks no sane adult would ever choose. Think about it. Who hasn't done something reckless, even stupid, for a friend at that age? Who hasn't risked everything just to keep a bond alive? That so-called foolishness was your biology operating with perfect precision. It was training you, forcing you to form connections strong enough to survive beyond the family unit. And then came the brutality of evolution's design. Once you had learned to form social bonds, once you had understood how to navigate hierarchies and survive independently, the biological program that kept those friendships alive simply switched off. It was like a light going out. One day, the bond that once felt eternal suddenly felt irrelevant, and you couldn't explain why. And this leads us to the most devastating realization of all. Carl Jung's insights into the architecture of the human psyche explain why this feels so hauntingly familiar. Jung observed that our personalities are not static. They evolve, they transform, they shed old skins and grow new ones. The person you were at 16 is not the same person you are at 30, and your best friend was undergoing the same transformation. You didn't just outgrow each other, you became strangers, because the selves who once connected no longer exist. What's left are two new people, shaped by time, by change, by individuation, standing across from each other with no bridge strong enough to close the distance. That is why your best friend from adolescence feels like a ghost. They are both real and gone, familiar and foreign. And understanding this isn't meant to break you, it's meant to free you. Because what feels like loss is, in truth, evolution carrying you forward. Carl Jung had a revolutionary theory about how human personality develops. He called it individuation, and it explains perfectly why the strongest friendships of our youth often fade without anyone being at fault. During the first half of life, our personality is dominated by what he called the persona, a social mask we construct to fit into the world. In adolescence, this persona is constantly in formation, which is why we are so adaptable, so capable of merging completely with our friends. It wasn't conscious imitation, but the natural process of two people shaping their social masks side by side. Yet Jung noticed something fascinating. Around the ages of 35 to 40, most people experience what is called the midlife crisis. It is the moment when the psyche begins to demand something different, the real process of individuation. Individuation is the journey of becoming who you truly are, not who the world expects you to be. And here lies the crucial point. This process requires breaking away from external identifications that once defined your youthful identity, including friendships built upon those shared identifications. For years, it may have felt impossible to separate oneself from the other, but eventually each person needs their own space, their own roots, their own direction toward the light. If they remain entangled, both fail to grow. The same happens with youthful friendships. It is not that the bond failed, it is that each person is responding to a deeper evolutionary impulse, the drive to uncover their authentic individuality. And here comes the part that hurts, yet also liberates. This distancing is not personal. It is not that they stopped caring. It is that each is following the most natural path of human development. But there is more, because natural selection not only explains why this happens, it reveals why it must happen. Here lies the revelation that changes everything. Human relationships are subject to a process of natural selection, just as rigorous as any other aspect of evolution. Not every relationship is meant to survive every stage of your life. This is not a flaw in the system, but its most refined feature. Think of it this way. In nature, different species form temporary associations that benefit both under certain conditions. When those conditions change, the association dissolves naturally. There is no drama, no blame, only recognition that the purpose has been fulfilled. The same applies to human friendships, except that we interpret the process emotionally because we are conscious of it. The intense friendships of adolescence served specific functions. They helped you develop social skills, explore different sides of your personality, build the confidence to take risks, and create a sense of identity apart from your family. Once those functions were completed, the level of maintenance those friendships required began to outweigh their adaptive benefits, and your brain, which is always calculating costs and benefits unconsciously, began to redirect emotional energy toward relationships that served your current evolutionary needs. Pause for a moment and reflect on this. How much emotional energy did it take to sustain a best friend in adolescence? Those endless conversations, the intense dramas, the constant need for mutual validation. Now compare that with the energy you have available as an adult, with responsibilities, romantic relationships, perhaps children, and a professional career. The natural selection of relationships is not cruel, it is efficient. And here is what most people fail to understand. This process does not mean that adult friendships are less valuable or less profound. It means they are different, optimized for other functions. Successful adult friendships rely less on emotional intensity and more on compatibility of values, lifestyles, and life goals. They are less dramatic, but more stable, less exclusive, but more authentic. Have you noticed how the best friendships formed in adulthood feel different? There is less urgency, less need for constant reassurance, less drama. Yet there is more mutual respect, more space for individual growth, more ability to maintain connection despite differences. This is not coincidence, it is evolution in action. And once you understand this process, something extraordinary happens. You stop seeing the fading of youthful friendships as a personal failure and begin to recognize it as evidence that your psychological development is following its natural and healthy course. Now that you understand the mechanics behind the natural fading of friendships, the practical question arises: how can you navigate this process consciously and healthily? First, by recognizing the signs of a friendship in natural transition, a gradual decrease in contact without specific conflict, conversations that feel forced when they once flowed effortlessly, growing differences in life priorities, and a mutual sense that you are moving in different directions. When you recognize these signs, the natural impulse is to resist them. We tell ourselves we must try harder. We cannot allow our friendship to fade away, yet resisting a natural transition often accelerates the end and makes the separation more painful for both. Instead of struggling against it, practice conscious letting go. This means honoring what the friendship once was, without forcing it into something it no longer is. It means allowing interactions to become less frequent without interpreting that as rejection. Conscious letting go also involves honest communication when the moment is right. I have reflected on how much we both have changed, and it feels natural that our friendship should evolve as well. Second, invest consciously in friendships that align with your current stage of life. The bonds that thrive in adulthood Respect boundaries without unnecessary drama. Bring value to your present reality. Remain connected even with less frequent contact and support your individual growth. Third, develop the ability to form new friendships that are appropriate for your age and current path. Adult friendships are built differently, through shared activities rather than unlimited free time, through mutual respect rather than emotional intensity, through long-term consistency rather than constant connection. And here lies the most essential truth. Once you master this process consciously, you discover something that transforms not only your friendships, but also your relationship with yourself. When you finally accept that the natural drifting apart of youthful friendships is not a failure, but an evolution, you experience a deep freedom most people never know. It is the freedom to grow without guilt. For years, many of us have carried the silent burden of guilt for not being able to maintain lifelong friendships. We interpret every separation as proof that we are bad friends, shallow people, or that something is fundamentally wrong within us. But once you understand the evolutionary logic behind this process, that guilt dissolves, you realize your ability to form deep bonds has not diminished. It has simply adapted to your present needs. And something even more powerful begins to happen. You start to see your current relationships through an entirely new perspective. Instead of clinging desperately to each friendship out of fear of losing it, you begin to appreciate every bond for what it truly is in the present moment. You stop pressuring your friendships to fulfill roles that belong to earlier stages of your life. This acceptance also transforms the relationship you have with yourself. You grant yourself permission to evolve without the pressure of remaining consistent with earlier versions of who you once were. You understand that changing is not betraying who you were. It is becoming who you are meant to be. Think for a moment about how much energy you have spent feeling guilty over friendships that naturally faded. How many times have you judged yourself for no longer being the same person you were at 16, 20, or 25? Jung's idea of individuation suggests that clinging to outdated identities is one of the primary sources of psychological suffering. When you give yourself permission to grow, you not only release your former friends from unrealistic expectations, you also liberate yourself. And there is a surprising additional gift. When you stop forcing friendships that are in natural transition, you sometimes discover that a few of them can reconnect on an entirely new level. After individuation, two people who grew in different directions may meet again as whole individuals and create an authentic adult friendship based on who they truly are, not on who they once were together. But even when this does not happen, there is no real loss. The memories remain intact, the lessons endure, and the emotional space you free becomes available for new connections that serve who you have become. This is the beautiful paradox of human growth. Only by releasing what once was can we create space for what may come. We have traveled across complex emotional ground, from the painful confusion of watching close friends drift away to the liberating understanding of why this is not only normal, but necessary. The truth about friendships that drift apart as we grow is both simpler and deeper than we ever imagined. It is simple because it follows the most basic evolutionary laws. Yet it is also profoundly complex because it forces us to rethink our beliefs about loyalty, about change, and about what it truly means to grow. When we understand that the intense friendships of our youth are not random, but serve very specific evolutionary functions, we free ourselves from the guilt or the sadness that comes when those relationships inevitably shift, transform, or even fade away. These bonds, once the center of our lives, were not failures when they changed. They were part of a greater natural design. When we look at this through the lens of Carl Jung's idea of individuation, we begin to see that personal growth always requires a certain degree of separation from the identities we once shared with others. As children and teenagers, friendships often feel like an extension of ourselves, like mirrors through which we define who we are. But to truly grow, we eventually need to step outside of those shared identities. This is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of becoming. Recognizing this truth allows us to understand that there is a kind of natural selection at work in human relationships. Some friendships endure because they continue to serve our evolving needs, while others complete their purpose and gently fall away. And perhaps the most important lesson hidden in all of this is the following: the conscious ability to let go of a friendship that has fulfilled its role is, in reality, one of the most sophisticated forms of love. It is to love someone enough to allow them to grow, even when that growth takes them away from you. It is to love yourself enough to follow your own path of development, even if it requires walking in a direction where your old companions cannot follow. And it is to love the very process of life itself, to trust in its wisdom, to honor its rhythm, and to believe that every change carries with it a hidden meaning. In the end, friendships that change or drift apart as we mature are not failures of human connection. They are evidence that human connection is so advanced, so adaptable, that it can transform itself in order to meet the different stages of our journey through life. These changes are not signs of weakness. They are signs of growth. They remind us that the relationships we once cherished have already given us what we needed, and now we are free to step forward, carrying those gifts with us. Within this realization, we discover something invaluable. We find peace with our past because we understand that nothing was lost. It simply evolved. And we gain wisdom for the future because we learn how to navigate the ongoing dance of relationships, both with others and within ourselves. To grow, after all, is not to lose. To grow is to become. It is to step fully into the person we always had the potential to be, even if that means leaving behind versions of ourselves that no longer serve our becoming. So I invite you to reflect. Think back to your own life. What was the most important friendship of your youth? How has that relationship evolved over the years? And now, with this perspective, can you see the natural process that was at work behind those changes? Your reflection might not only bring clarity to your own journey, but it could also help someone else who is struggling to understand their own experiences with the transitions of friendship. Because when we see friendships not as permanent possessions, but as living connections that flow with the current of life, we begin to appreciate them more deeply. We no longer hold them with fear, but with gratitude. We no longer mourn their change, but celebrate the wisdom they have left behind. And in doing so, we walk forward with open hearts, ready for the next chapter, ready for the next connection, ready for the next version of ourselves. Before you leave, remember to subscribe to this channel and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming reflections. And let me leave you with this. Every friendship has its season, and when one cycle ends, it does not mean emptiness. It means that life is gently preparing you for a new beginning. Have you ever wondered why sometimes, even when surrounded by people, silence seems to scream louder? Have you felt that the conversations around you no longer touch anything that truly matters? Behind the smiles and polite gestures lies nothing more than a subtle theater sustained by the fear of being alone. Carl Jung once said that trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The search for understanding who we are often leads us to the paradox of losing everything that no longer resonates with truth. And Nietzsche whispered a warning to the world that few truly listen to. When you stare long into the abyss also gazes back at you. Finally, Socrates, with his disarming simplicity, reminds us to know ourselves. But what happens when you really begin to know yourself? Not superficially or conveniently, but in the deepest part of existence. You realize that many of your relationships, your words, and your commitments were desperate attempts to feel accepted in a world that barely knows itself. All of us have played that game at some point, wearing the right mask for the right setting. But what happens when you start, almost imperceptibly, to take those masks off one by one? Not out of rebellion, not out of pride, but simply because they no longer fit. This path is not for everyone. It is the path of awakening. It is the path of the one who sees beyond appearances, the one who understands that walking alone is not punishment, but the inevitable consequence of seeing the world with naked eyes. This is not a story about loneliness in its ordinary sense. It is about the silent transformation that happens when truth becomes more important than acceptance, when silence begins to carry more weight than words, when absence becomes presence and companionship becomes a detail. Prepare to walk through mirrors, to strip away illusions. Every word here is a whisper at dawn, intimate, profound, perhaps necessary. Awakening does not arrive as sudden illumination. It comes as a soft noise in the depths of consciousness, a subtle discomfort, a small fracture in the routine. At first, you don't understand. You find yourself in conversations, laughing as always, saying the right phrases, but something within no longer responds. The words sound hollow, the laughter feels rehearsed, and then you realize you are tired of acting. You watch others, and everything looks like choreography. People seeking attention without noticing, trading validation for belonging, faking confidence while trembling inside, and you slowly step out of the scene. Not out of disdain or arrogance, but because the script no longer works, and leaving it is the first act of freedom. You still go to work, take part in conversations, respond to messages kindly, but inside, something has changed. There is a silent withdrawal, a subtle renunciation. It is as if a veil has fallen, taking with it the certainties that once sustained you. You begin to see life behind the makeup. And what you see is uncomfortable, but real. People say you are distant, that you have changed, and they are right. You stopped molding yourself to expectations. You stopped smiling just to avoid seeming rude. You stopped nodding just to keep others comfortable. And by stopping, you discover something unsettling. Most of the connections you had were sustained by that effort. Without it, the bond loosens, often disappearing. It hurts, yes, but it is a lucid pain. Jung taught that the ego is nothing more than a social convention internalized. When you begin to see through it, the theater of coexistence loses its charm. You realize how much you sought approval, how often you stayed silent to fit in, how deeply you needed others to validate your worth. And suddenly, you no longer need it. That is where everything begins. You learn to sit in your own silence without fear. The company of others is no longer a crutch. The noise of the world is no longer required to feel alive. There is a strange peace in this, a disconcerting tranquility, because even if it looks like you are moving away from others, you are actually moving closer to yourself. It is as if, for the first time, you hear your own voice, the one that was always drowned by the fear of rejection. And that voice tells uncomfortable truths, but also reveals paths. It guides you inward, beyond the noise, and in that silence, something rebuilds. You begin to remember who you were, before learning to please, before chasing applause, before losing yourself in roles imposed by the world. Awakening is this return to the essential, the courage to see yourself naked, without characters, and it is also the acceptance that, in doing so, many things and many people will be left behind, not out of guilt, but as consequence. For when you rise, you naturally distance yourself from what can only survive on the ground. Most teachings of self-improvement revolve around phrases like, work harder, believe in yourself, just try more. But what if the problem isn't lack of effort, but the absence of a clear model to change from within? There is a process that shows you how to reprogram mental patterns, redefine identity, and build a life aligned with your values without relying on temporary bursts of motivation. Rooted in cognitive science, practical psychology, and timeless philosophy, it offers not just discipline and focus, but also clarity, coherence, and inner lightness. The solitude that follows awakening is not made of blank walls and oppressive silence. It is a living presence, dense and full, imposing itself without sound. It does not shout, but it does not ask permission either. It arrives with the lightness of something that always existed, waiting for you to be ready. And when you are, it reveals itself not as punishment, but as a mirror. At first it feels strange. The world always equated being alone with being less wanted, less loved, less human. Society endlessly displays smiling crowds, friends embracing, endless celebrations. But no one told you that there is something profoundly sacred in walking without company, in not needing to smile at anyone, in no longer bargaining your truth in exchange for belonging. Silence, once feared, becomes a balm. You no longer need to fill every space. You can let conversations die without guilt. You can sit anywhere without needing to be noticed. You can simply exist without a role, without performance. And it is precisely in that instant, when you stop acting, that freedom approaches. It does not arrive with an audience or applause. It comes like a warm breath on a cold day, like that moment at dawn when everyone else is asleep and you feel strangely alive. You no longer chase acceptance. You no longer pursue glances that affirm your worth. You realize how much of your life you spent trying to be seen and how exhausting it was. Now, by no longer seeking it, you feel whole, as if you have finally returned home. Many confuse this change with coldness. They say you have grown distant, dry, insensitive. But you know it is the opposite. Now you feel everything with greater depth. Only you no longer react as you once did. You don't need to dramatize or prove you feel. You simply feel. Jung also warned about the danger of constant distraction. The modern mind fears emptiness, so it fills everything with movement. But you have discovered that emptiness is not a void, but space. Space to breathe, to think, to simply be. And in that space, you begin to listen to yourself. And what you hear changes everything. Not everyone is ready for such silence. Some will try to fill it with noise, questions, or judgment. They will think you withdrew out of pride, but it isn't that. You withdrew because you needed to listen to something that only reveals itself in absence, your own voice. And when you hear it, it does not ask for audience or applause. It only wants you to remain present, whole, even when unseen. That is why, the deeper you enter the truth of solitude, the less it becomes pain, and the more it becomes choice. There is no more desperation, no more urgency. You can be with someone, but you don't need to. You can speak, but silence is enough. You can belong, but without losing yourself in the process. This silent autonomy is a revolution. You are not an exile. You are a traveler who chose the less illuminated path, the one with no signs or promises, but with truth. And truth, my friend, walks alone. There is a kind of connection that is not connection at all. It is performance. You only realize this when you stop trying to please, when you begin to listen to conversations, not only with your ears, but with your soul. And you sense that very few are truly listening. They wait only for their turn to speak, trading small doses of approval, repeating the same ideas, pretending agreement to keep the atmosphere light. You have done this, we all have, and maybe you still do it by reflex. But a moment comes when that effort hurts more than silence, and then something breaks inside. From that point on, you can no longer remain there, not because you hate people, but because you can no longer lie, neither to them nor to yourself. The relationships that once seemed unshakable now reveal themselves as fragile as thin glass. They were never built on truth, but on conventions. We complain about the same boss, laugh at the same jokes, agree with the same absurdities just to avoid conflict. And then something within you shifts. You stop complaining out of habit. You stop laughing out of obligation. You stop agreeing merely to maintain the bond. And what happens? The relationships begin to wither, not out of cruelty, not because of conflict, but simply because they cannot survive your truth. Carl Jung reminded us that much of what we call social life is merely a hall of mirrors. You reflect back to me what I want to see, and I do the same for you. But the mirror shatters the moment one of us refuses to keep reflecting illusions. When that happens, the reaction is often strange. People drift away, not because you harmed them, but because you no longer hold them up. You begin to notice how much of these bonds depended on the constant maintenance of shared stories, small narratives of suffering, of success, of identity. But the issue is, you changed. To maintain those narratives, you would need to deny your transformation, and you no longer wish to deny yourself. So, you grow silent. Even when you know the answer, you choose to listen. Even when you disagree, you allow the words to pass. You no longer enter the game, and this confuses others. They begin to see you as cold, detached, arrogant. Yet in truth, you are more connected than ever, not with the egos of others, but with the depth of your own soul. Here lies one of the most painful, yet liberating discoveries along the path. Much of what we once called friendship was little more than an emotional negotiation disguised as affection. You praise me, I embrace you. You listen, I confirm you. But if one side changes the pattern, the whole structure trembles, and perhaps for the first time, you choose not to hold up those fragile constructions anymore. You are not rejecting people, you are rejecting the theater. And in doing so, yes, you lose much. But what you gain cannot be taken away. Integrity. From here on, the encounters that remain are fewer, but they are real. You recognize a glance that has also grown weary of pretending, a soul that does not demand performance, a presence that does not wish to mold you. And that is rare, so rare that sometimes you wait in silence for a long time. Yet you prefer the waiting to losing yourself in another false role. You have learned that it is not worth pretending simply to avoid loneliness, and that it is often better to be truly alone than accompanied by illusion. If there was any doubt, now it dissolves. An honest absence is far better than a conditioned presence. The peace that arises in solitude is not silent because it is empty, but because it is complete. After all the masks fall, after the fragile ties break, after the noise subsides, there you remain, whole, stripped of needs, of social anxieties, of expectations. And in that nakedness of the soul, something profound begins to bloom. Serenity does not mean becoming indifferent. On the contrary, you feel everything with greater clarity. But you no longer need to chase after validation, recognition, or companionship. You have learned to inhabit your own presence as one inhabits a secret temple. At first, others confuse this with apathy. They think you have renounced the world, but in truth, it is the opposite. You have simply chosen another way of being in the world, without noise, without pretense, without masks. You do not close yourself off, but you no longer force yourself open either. You do not avoid people, but neither do you seek them out of habit. Your energy now has a filter. Only what is real passes through. The truth is, once you find this peace, the volume of the world feels unbearably loud, and you, who once shouted for belonging, now walk in silence. Not out of shyness, but out of reverence. There is something sacred in no longer needing to be noticed, in no longer needing to be understood, to be authentic. Jung often pointed to the paradox of freedom. To truly live, one must flow with life, but not drown in it. That is exactly what this stage is. You no longer strive to be accepted. You no longer struggle to hold up what cannot endure. You simply flow, with calm, with presence, with the serene confidence of one who no longer needs to prove anything. Days change, faces come and go, but you remain steady, like a rock beneath the tide, untouched by the waves of approval. There is no longer desperation for encounters. If they happen, let them be whole. If not, the silence remains a worthy companion. The beauty of this new stage is that your eyes begin to see differently. Empty conversations no longer trap you. Social demands no longer sway you. The expectations of others no longer define you. You have become unclassifiable. You no longer fit into labels. You do not belong to groups. You do not respond to invitations out of politeness. And that freedom unsettles others, and at times, even yourself. For the price of truth is high. You lose stages, roles, applause. Yet in return, you gain something rare: authenticity. You walk alone, yes, but it is not exile. It is a journey. And on this journey, you discover that the peace of the solitary is not found in the absence of people, but in the absence of masks. You stopped diminishing yourself simply to be accepted. You stopped twisting your essence into unnatural shapes just to be liked. You stopped silencing your inner voice merely to preserve a false harmony. And that decision, Carl Jung would say, is the first act of courage. The courage to abandon masks. The courage to wait in solitude until something authentic arises. The courage to remain whole, even when the world prefers fragments. For the one who dares to be whole is the one who refuses to live as an incomplete projection of someone else's expectations. The peace of solitude, Jung reminds us, is not emptiness. It is the serenity of no longer hiding, of no longer demanding completion from another, of discovering that to dwell with oneself is, at last, to arrive home. Walking alone is not the destination. It is the unfolding path of individuation. It begins the moment you stop pretending, when you recognize that what many call life is often a rehearsal of survival, smiling without joy, repeating borrowed scripts, nodding in agreement to avoid conflict. Jung understood this repetition as the tyranny of the collective shadow, an endless performance of inherited patterns that numbs the soul. But to choose truth, your truth, is to embrace sacrifice. You will lose people. Invitations will vanish. Conversations will thin. Celebrations will forget your name. You will be misunderstood in 1,000 ways, and perhaps never in the right one. Yet still you remain, because you know in the depths of your being that any bond built on falsehood is not a bond at all, but a cage draped with beautiful curtains. Loneliness is not punishment, it is initiation. It is the secret threshold that opens only when you stop begging for belonging and begin to see that wholeness is more valuable than approval. True peace, the kind almost no one reaches, begins precisely when you cease to chase it. You do not walk alone because you despise the world. You walk alone because the world is not yet ready to accompany a soul who no longer plays a role. And still, somewhere deep within, you sense a quiet promise. One day, someone will see you, not the mask, not the persona, but the self that has been there all along. And in that silent recognition, without pretense, there will be connection. Until that moment, you continue forward with clear eyes, grounded steps, and a soul that no longer trembles before the silence. If you have reached this point, thank you, not for consuming a video, but for keeping your heart open. This was never mere content to fill the void. It was a mirror, a whisper, an invitation to look deeper. I recall a night when I sat alone in a darkened room. Outside, the city pulsed with horns, hurried voices, restless footsteps. Inside, however, there was only silence. Yet for the first time, that silence was not empty. It was alive. It was presence. It was a beginning. That night, I realized I was not withdrawing from the world. I was moving closer to my true self. And since then, I have been learning to honor that path, even when it leads away from comfort and into the unknown. If these words have touched you, it is not by chance. Perhaps you too are walking the path of individuation. Perhaps you are discovering that only by losing what is false can you encounter the treasure of your real being. Perhaps, like in that darkened room, you are beginning to hear the quiet voice of the soul that has been calling to you for years. If so, welcome. You are not truly alone, even if your steps echo in solitude. This space exists for you, for those who long for depth over distraction, who dare to question, to unravel, to be remade. Thank you for allowing us, even briefly, even silently, to walk this stretch of the journey together. And if you feel the call to take this further, to reclaim sovereignty over your own mind, you will find guidance in the description and in the first pinned comment. There, you may understand how this process unfolds and why it transforms all who embrace it. And before you vanish back into the quiet night, if this spoke to you, you may like, comment, or subscribe. If you choose not to, that is fine as well. Pretend you clicked, if only to keep the old social play alive. And those videos now appearing on your screen, do not click them if you are tired. They are not distractions. They are doors. And once you step through, you may never again be the same. Why do so many women feel that they have lost themselves precisely at the moment when they fulfilled their dreams? Why does the love that should liberate so often turn into a cell decorated with flowers? And what if marriage, that ideal so highly exalted, were in fact a broken mirror that reflects everything except the truth? The woman who does not know her own soul before belonging to another will belong only to emptiness. This is a truth that was never written in those exact words, yet it cries out in every symbol that was decoded, in every dream that was studied, in every shadow that was dared to be faced. And today, you will hear that forbidden truth, not as a distant theory, but as a voice that may have already whispered inside you on silent nights when everything seemed fine except your soul. This is not a critique of love. It is an invitation to lucidity. It is a candle lit in the dark room where you stored questions no one allowed you to ask. It is a dangerous but necessary journey between the rituals you are taught to repeat and the woman you have not yet dared to be. There was once a woman who dreamed of the altar, but that altar did not belong to her. She dreamed from childhood, played at getting married, placed imaginary veils upon herself. She was celebrated for being delicate, for knowing how to care, for being ready for love. But no one taught her to be ready for herself. She learned to be chosen, but never to choose herself. The myth of the bride is one of the most insidious constructions of the collective imagination, and like every myth, it does not need proof. It lives in language, in fairy tales, in songs, in family glances when they ask, and in the awkward silence when she says she does not want to marry. That myth says, marriage is the highest point of feminine life, its happy ending. But no one asks, a happy ending for whom? It has been said that archetypes are living structures of the collective unconscious. They shape our expectations, emotions, and even our decisions. The archetype of the bride is seductive because it offers a promise. If you are good, beautiful, and kind, you will be chosen. And then you will be loved, and then you will be fulfilled. But here lies the trap. The woman who dresses for another, who prepares her soul as if it were a wrapped gift, moves farther and farther from her own center. She becomes image, reflection, role. And this is how the prison is born. Not a prison of bars, but a symbolic one. Idealize love as a substitute for self-knowledge. How many women have dimmed their inner light to fit the role of the ideal partner? How many sank into marriages, hoping to find themselves, and became even more lost? The unconscious does not care about social rules. It only asks whether this makes the soul grow. And when marriage becomes only a rite of passage, a social validation, a response to fear and loneliness, it slowly kills the soul. It is like watering plastic flowers. It looks like care, but it is only repetition. The woman smiles, but her eyes do not shine. And the cruelest part is that society congratulates her. She has become a respectable woman. But at night, when she is alone, a question burns like a forgotten match inside her chest. Whose life am I living? There is a fragment in an original text that captures this feeling with the beauty of a wound. The woman who enters the temple as a stranger does love, but she loves through projection, not through presence. She loves what the other awakens in her, and when he withdraws, she collapses because she believed the light came from him, when it was always her own light reflected and refracted through the eyes of another. The myth of the bride feeds a powerful illusion that another can complete us, but the truth is that no one completes anyone. Fulfillment is not bought with rings, celebrations, or declarations. It is born from radical contact with who you are when no one is watching. And that is frightening. That is why many women prefer the role over freedom, because the role comes with a script, with direction, with approval. But freedom demands solitude. And solitude does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate with what is most essential within us. When a woman is conditioned from an early age to seek meaning in the gaze of another, she forgets to look inward. And inside her sleeps the barefoot girl, running through open fields, the one not yet domesticated, the one who still feels the world with her entire body, the one who has not learned to fold herself to fit into a wedding dress. This first chapter is not a condemnation of marriage. It is a call to dismantle the myth of the bride, that beautiful disguise of self-negation. It is an invitation to look into your own mirror and ask, if I were not the woman they expect me to be, who would I be? And perhaps the answer will arrive in silence, like a whisper in the middle of the night, or like a fire that begins with a single spark. But it will arrive. Before continuing, have you felt that the more you try to stay calm, the faster you break inside? That is not weakness, it is mental overload. We live surrounded by emotional noise, and no one taught us how to filter what truly matters. The real problem lies in the lack of mental structure. Most people act from emotion without knowing that it is possible to build a cold, firm, and controlled way of operating. And yes, that can be trained. There comes a moment when a woman looks into the mirror and no longer knows who is looking back at her. It is not forgetting, it is layering. Layer upon layer, her face was gradually covered with the desire of another, with maternal expectations, with religious patterns, with paternal gazes, with comparisons among peers, with praise that slowly became a cage, strong, beautiful, admired, shaped into an image meant to be desired and approved. But who is she when all of that falls away? This unconscious mirroring was described as the projection of inner feminine and inner masculine forces, principles that live within every psyche. When a woman has not yet found her own center, she tends to project her inner masculine energy onto an external figure. She does not fall in love with him. She falls in love with what he awakens inside her. That is where enchantment begins, and so does the wound. When she loves before knowing her own soul, she loves through projection. And when he leaves, she collapses, believing her light came from him, when it had always been her own. This is the wounded feminine, the woman who forgot herself in order to live inside another's reflection. She idealizes, nurtures, adapts, gives so much that she empties herself, not because she is weak, but because she learned that loving meant disappearing, when in truth, loving means expanding. She loves with sacred intensity, yet also with desperate urgency. She turns the man into an altar and forgets that the true temple lives within. And when he fails, as all humans do, disappointment arrives like a divine betrayal. What was betrayed was not love, but the illusion of completeness. Projecting the inner masculine, that creative, discerning, rational energy of the feminine unconscious onto external masculine figures is an inevitable stage. The danger lies in remaining there, because the man becomes a magical mirror in which she seeks her soul. But mirrors break, and when they break, they cut. The real tragedy is not the end of love, but the beginning of disorientation. If she is not someone's wife, partner, chosen one, then who is she? That question echoes as an existential void, and many attempt to fill it with another love, another mirror, another reflection. Yet it is only repetition, a new face for the same absence. There is a recurring dreamlike image describing a woman standing before a mirror that turns into mist. She tries to touch the reflection of a man, but her hand passes through it. Behind the mirror appears her own face, older, wiser, washed in solitude. That image represents a symbolic ritual of awakening. The woman who searched for the other finally encounters herself, not as a replacement, but as a return. This is where many either fracture or awaken, because realizing that the life lived so far was projection, rather than presence, is a rupture with no reversal. It is the collapse of the social mask and the beginning of inner integration. Why do so many flee from this encounter? Because the reflection of another offers an easier story. Within it, she can be the devoted partner, the perfect companion, the one who loves without conditions. But love that forgets itself is not virtue, it is abandonment. And like every abandoned wound, it rots inwardly. The woman who loves without knowing herself becomes, without realizing it, an accomplice to her own dissolution. There is no romance in this. The projected inner masculine, once imagined as a savior, eventually reveals itself as a tyrant. The voice that once sounded gentle begins to demand. Emotional devotion turns into servitude, and she cannot understand why she feels tired, low, depleted, yet her soul knows. She is living outside herself. Then come the dreams, the fractures, the breakdowns, the separations. This is where many label the experience as emotional crisis, depression, chronic dissatisfaction. Sometimes, however, all that is happening is that the soul is trying to return home. Healing is not found in loving more, but in loving with awareness, in withdrawing projections, in looking at another and saying silently that love exists without mirrors, without halves, without losing oneself. It is a quiet path, asking patience, courage, solitude, honesty, responsibility, depth, humility, presence, endurance, clarity, commitment, silence, listening, time, boundaries, integration, self-recognition, grounding, wholeness, truth, maturity, embodiment. I am whole, and you must become whole as well. When a woman gathers her animus back into herself, a new voice begins to be heard. A voice that does not demand, but clarifies, that does not command, but converses. The true animus does not say obey, it says awaken. That voice marks the birth of discernment, and with it, the woman stops loving from hunger and begins to love from presence. She no longer looks for a man to complete her. She looks for someone to walk beside, without eclipses. But that love is born only after she passes through the pain of unloved illusions, of killing the image of the prince, of the savior, of the man who would make everything finally worthwhile. The pain is real. It is a symbolic mourning. It is the farewell to the girl who waited to be rescued. But in place of that girl, a slow, serene, complete woman is reborn. A woman who knows that true love is not fusion, it is reverence. She looks into the other's eyes and whispers, "You are not my mirror. You are a universe, and I am one too. If we meet, let it be in the space between our centers, not in the shadow of our lacks." And so, a new story begins, less enchanted, but far more real. Before truly loving someone, a woman needs to love her own silence. But I do not speak of the silence imposed by circumstances, the kind that closes the mouth while the world speaks louder. I speak of sacred silence, of chosen solitude, of the emptiness filled with presence that frightens, because no one is there anymore except herself. And for many, this is terrifying, because the truth is, we were taught to fear solitude. They call it abandonment, failure, sadness. They say, "Poor thing, she is alone," as if being with oneself were a tragedy. But Jung knew that the self emerges only in the desert, far from applause, rituals, and conventions. Before marrying any man, a woman must first marry her own soul. That inner marriage is silent, without witnesses, without visible rings, yet within it occurs the only union capable of sustaining all others: reconciliation with one's own essence. Solitude is the altar where the feminine soul finds its true power. It is there that she begins to hear what she once drowned with noise, routine, shallow conversations, and empty relationships. It is there that she realizes the love she sought in another was actually the echo of an inner call. She returns home, but that return is not sweet. It is mourning. She must bury the parts of herself that depended on the reflection of another. The woman who felt loved because she was desired, who measured her worth by the attention received, who confused affection with approval. Those parts die, and with them dies the illusion that love exists outside. She then begins to walk among her own ruins, and among the debris she finds something unexpected. A forgotten inner altar, covered in dust, yet alive. That altar does not ask for flowers, it asks for courage. Courage to sit before it and say, "Here I am. I do not know who I am, but I am willing to discover it." And their true individuation begins. She starts to hear the whispers of the soul, those once silenced by the voices of culture, family, and lost loves, and she remembers what she loved as a child, what made her vibrate before trying to please the world, the dreams she abandoned. For a togetherness that was never reciprocal, and then fear arises, because she realizes she may need to break with everything, with the union that silences her, with the profession that numbs her, with the bonds that keep her safe yet dead inside. At this point, many retreat, return to what is familiar, choose stability even at the cost of the soul, because the inner altar demands sacrifice, but not the sacrifice of one's essence in the name of love. It demands the sacrifice of masks. And removing masks hurts more than staying in the role, because the mask protects, the mask pleases, the mask is understood, but the naked soul is untamable and therefore misunderstood. The woman who chooses to inhabit her solitude begins to provoke discomfort around her. She no longer reacts as before, no longer begs for presence, no longer erases herself to keep the peace. She speaks less, but what she says resonates. She appears less, but when she arrives, her presence is a field of force. She no longer needs to be accepted, because she has accepted herself. And this is the most dangerous moment, because now she is free. And a free woman in a society built on the idea that her value lies in being chosen is seen as a threat. They call her cold, selfish, difficult, but in truth, she simply stopped begging for love. The world fears women who have married their own soul, because they can no longer be controlled by old archetypes, the bride, the wife, the mother. They become unpredictable, uncontrollable, radiant under their own law. It is at this point that solitude is transmuted from emptiness into vessel, from absence into power. She realizes she is full, not full of certainties, but full of presence. And when and if love arrives, she no longer awaits it as salvation, but as sharing. The other is no longer a crutch. It is a clear mirror where she does not seek to see her lack, but her completeness reflected. She no longer wants someone to make her happy. She wants someone who respects her sadness. She does not seek safety. She offers risk, the risk of loving someone who does not depend on you. And the most beautiful thing is that many times, only at this point, true love occurs, because now there is space for the other to be who they are. Without the need to play roles, the woman who married her solitude can love with more devotion, not less, because love is no longer a necessity, it is a choice, it is a right of freedom. She no longer asks, "Will he choose me?" She asks, "Is he ready to meet me at this altar I built within myself?" And if the answer is no, she continues with a whole heart, with a steady step, with a peaceful soul, because she knows that true companionship begins with one's own presence, and love that does not respect that presence is not love, it is lack disguised as affection. Without the inner altar, any union will be nothing more than an echo of absence. The woman who inhabits her solitude transforms the world around her, not by trying to change anyone, but by refusing to betray herself. And that is the most real love that exists. The good wife dies slowly, not in the body, but in the gaze, in the laughter that was once music and becomes protocol, in the soul that traded dance for routines, art for schedules, desire for duty, and the world applauds her death. It calls her a mature woman. It says, the reward is worth it. An orderly home, dressed children, a husband who introduces her proudly as my wife, but inside, she is a cemetery of herself. The woman who performs every correct gesture of devotion, but whose eyes no longer shine, has become what was called a petrified anima. She laughs with elegance, but her womb no longer sings. She welcomes others, but forgot what it is to be touched from within. She is good, but lost her soul along the way. Society teaches that this woman won, but in truth, she only learned to die without making a scene. And then one night, something breaks. Sometimes it is a dream, other times a deep silence in the shower, or a tiredness that does not leave. It is the soul trying to emerge from the depth where it was locked away. She remembers the girl she once was, the one who ran through fields, the one who wrote secrets, the one who said no with firmness, and yes with desire. And she realizes that girl is still alive, undernourished, but alive, crying silently inside the correct woman she became. It is at this point that the silent rebellion of the feminine soul begins. And no, it is not against marriage, nor against motherhood, nor against commitments. It is against the lie that to be loved, she needed to disappear. Here many lose themselves or awaken because realizing you lived a life that was not yours hurts more than any separation, hurts more than fear of solitude, hurts more than guilt. But it is a fertile pain, a pain that plants seeds, a pain that calls the soul back home. Every true transformation begins with a rupture. What seemed stable dissolves. What was certainty turns into fog. It is the dark night of the soul, the point where the persona dies and the real being begins to be born. And birth is violent, because the woman must disobey not others, but the inner voice that says, "Be good." That is the voice of the inner patriarch, the shadow of the animus, the unconscious programming that shaped her from within. That voice says, "Be useful. Do not complain. Think of others. You are exaggerating. Be grateful." She realizes that this voice speaks as if it were God, but it is only the collective ghost of submission. Then, for the first time, she screams, perhaps inwardly, perhaps in silence, but she screams, and that scream frees her. The woman who dares to kill the good wife begins to discover the priestess who had been silenced. She no longer acts for approval. She acts out of fidelity to herself. And that is frightening, because now she begins to say no to invitations that do not honor her soul, no to lukewarm relationships, no to roles that made her forget who she is. She no longer needs to be right. She needs vitality. She no longer seeks to look pretty. She seeks to be true. And that truth is sometimes rough because she does not bend to the molds of what a good woman should be. But attention, this does not mean she becomes cold or hard. On the contrary, now she loves with depth, but no longer tolerates love that diminishes her. She welcomes, but does not extinguish herself. She offers her chest, but does not sacrifice it. She listens, but no longer silences her own voice to maintain external harmony. This is the rebellion of the soul, silent but irrevocable. It does not need to fight. Her change itself is the confrontation. The people around her feel it. Some move away, others try to pull her back into the old role, but she does not return. The woman who crossed the threshold of self-betrayal and recovered, her voice becomes dangerous to the collective unconscious because she can no longer be controlled. She is the living bridge between what we were and what we can be. And now she knows. If loving means ceasing to be, she chooses not to be loved. If marriage means ceasing to live, she chooses to be alone. If the role is more important than the soul, she breaks the script, and that decision does not make her better. It makes her whole. She may even remain partnered, but she will no longer be the role. She will be herself within a conscious bond, or, if necessary, outside of it. And then paradoxically, love is born. Not idealized love, but real love. The kind that says, I see you as you are, and I see myself as I am. And still, we choose to walk together. This woman no longer needs approval. She needs resonance. And whoever does not resonate with her will fall behind. Not out of resentment, but out of coherence. The good wife died, and in her place, the true woman was born. And that woman, even if she never ascends to an altar, is already sacred, because she made of her own body, her own time, her own silence, her temple. There comes a moment when a woman stops searching, not because she gave up, but because she finally understood. She no longer seeks love as a promise, no longer longs for someone to complete her, a kiss to heal her, a relationship to give her meaning, because she herself became meaning. That is the point of return, the point of rubedo, the final phase of alchemy described by Jung. After the nigredo, the symbolic death. After the albedo, the clearing of consciousness, comes rubedo, the incarnation of the soul in the body, and the woman becomes serene fire. External union is only possible when the inner union has already occurred. Before that, all love is only hunger. And the inner marriage is not a poetic metaphor. It is a psychological, spiritual, and visceral process. The woman crossed the shadows, stripped away the masks, buried the good wife, learned to inhabit her solitude, and in the end, united the opposites within herself. Eros and logos, soul and reason, anima and animus. She no longer needs to project her inner masculine onto external partners, because it now lives within her, not as a figure of authority, but as a fluid and respectful inner dialogue. What once was lack became clarity. What once was dependence became presence. What once was waiting became being. She can love deeply, but no longer with the desperation of needing to be seen. She loves with the freedom of one who has already seen herself, naked, wounded, whole. The man who finds her now will not find a wife. He will find a mirror, not the kind that reflects the ego, but the mirror of the soul, where he will see what he did not know he needed to see, his own shadow, his own light. She does not love to be loved. She loves because she became love. Her touch does not bind, it frees. Her presence does not demand, it radiates. And if that man is not ready, she does not hold him back. She blesses him and moves on, because she now understands that true love is not a golden prison, nor a symbiosis, nor a test of endurance. It is a dance between two wholes, not a collage of wounded halves. This is the alchemical marriage. It does not happen in a stone temple, but in the invisible temple between breath and presence. It is when the woman looks at herself and says, "I belong to myself. I am my own altar. I am the mystery I was seeking in the other." And then the world trembles, because a woman who has reached this state can no longer be domesticated. She is the living manifestation of the anima mundi, the soul of the world. Every gesture of hers becomes ritual. Every silence, an oracle. Every gaze, a blessing or a mirror. The woman who married her soul is rare, not because she is inaccessible, but because few dare to cross the labyrinth. But when she crosses it, she becomes immortal in spirit, not in the literal sense, but because everything she touches carries the seed of awakening. She no longer needs external ceremonies because she has already heard the voice that no religion teaches, no psychologist prescribes, no lover can replace, the voice of integrated consciousness. That woman does not fear loving, but she does not accept just any love. She knows that love born from lack, from habit, or from dry convenience withers the soul. The soul only accepts love that expands, that makes one grow, that breathes alongside. And if that love does not appear, it is fine, because she already has herself. And that is not selfishness. It is sanity. She can live in partnership, yes, but not to complete an absence, rather to celebrate a fullness. And if living alone is the price of freedom, she pays it with tears, with nostalgia, with long nights, but she pays it because she now knows the value of what she carries within. She is no longer the bride who waits. She is the ceremony itself. She is the altar. She is the fire. She is the offering. She is the sacred that was always sought. And that sacred does not fit into rings, surnames, or promises. That sacred is conscious breathing, is a gaze without masks. It is overflowing presence. Now even time changes. She no longer measures life by social milestones. She measures it by the intensity of presence, by the truth of encounters, by the depth of losses. She knows that love that comes and goes is part of the flow, but what remains is what transforms her. And so the circle closes. The woman who once dreamed of marriage as salvation today marries her own shadow and becomes light. So why should a woman never marry? Because no external ritual can replace the deepest commitment that exists, the commitment to never abandon herself. Because while the world pushes you toward roles, wife, mother, the right girl, the soul whispers, you are much more than that. And until that whisper becomes a voice, and that voice becomes action, marriage will always be a fragile mirror held up by lack. The woman who dares to walk inward, who gets lost in the labyrinth of her own fears, who confronts the pain of no longer being who others wanted, but also not yet knowing who she truly is. That woman is preparing herself. She does not marry out of desperation. She does not love through projection. She does not promise out of fear. She waits not for someone, but for her own fullness. And when that fullness arrives, she becomes capable of something the world deeply fears, loving in freedom. The world fears women like this because they cannot be tamed, they cannot be sold, they cannot be used to confirm expectations. But perhaps that is exactly what the world needs most, right now. Whole women who love, yes, but who first have married their own silence, their own chaos, their own truth. And when that inner marriage happens, every form of love that comes afterward will only be mirror, reflection, echo, not prison. If you made it this far, I need to tell you something. And I do not say it out of obligation, thank you. Not that automatic end of video, thank you, but a thank you that comes from someone who has already gone through this process inwardly, from someone who has already cried, staring at the ceiling, feeling that everything was being done right, yet missing herself, from someone who had already been the good wife everyone admired and still felt empty. I wrote this script remembering a night when I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at a relationship that seemed perfect, but was silently consuming me. And I asked myself, is this it? Is this the love they say is destiny? The answer came slowly, the way everything real arrives. It was not him who was wrong. It was me who had not yet found myself. Since then, I spent years stripping away labels, expectations, and characters, and only after that, did I begin to understand what Jung spoke so much about regarding individuation. If this video touched you, unsettled you, made you rethink, then it fulfilled its role. Because the soul does not awaken in comfort, it awakens in the abyss. And only those who had the courage to look inward know. The abyss has a face, and many times it is our own.